Okay, so we're ready to do the last of our rock materials here, and we're going to deal with this, what I'm calling stratified rock. And we've got, in the final material anyway, I've only got a couple of things exposed on this just to keep things simple. But the actual map we're going to build is actually going to give us a lot of variety in the shape that this rock takes. And you're welcome to sort of expose those things as well. But what we are going to control is two levels of depth. So we have basically the stratified rock map split up into two, black and white, and you can adjust each one of those independently. So you can have the whole thing lift up, and then you can have within that the differential between the various bits and pieces also change. So you can have it relatively flat or bumpier or whatever. And I'm not liking that hard edge, so let's bring that back to what we had it before. So let's just smooth that out a little bit. Okay. Anyway, we can fool around with that later. So we're gonna make this happen here. Right, so this is how it appeared in my original experiment. So let's make a new substance graph, and we're going to call this stratified rock. Do that. And we're going to make it empty. Now we have two maps that are going to be coming off of this. So we're going to create an output node, and they're going to both be height maps. So I'm going to simplify my life, I think, a little bit, and just add, although I don't know if it's actually simplifying. So I'm going to go ahead and make one of these, kind of more or less generic. And I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it. And then I'm going to call one of these height grain. So that's for the grain of the rock. And then I'm going to call the other one height strata. Okay. So the first thing we're going to deal with is the noise for our strata. And I believe it's a grunge map. There we go. This guy right here. So that's grunge map 005. Now, this is a pretty good start. It's got a very organic, well, it's almost too organic a feeling to it. So the first thing I want to do, I'm thinking about the size of these strata in relationship to the overall size of my rocks, my land mass. So clearly those are way, way, way too big. So we're going to upscale this. I'm going to copy it and then paste it out twice to a 2K map. Right. Now, this is lovely, but it looks a bit too much like bark for me rather than rock strata. So I'm going to use a directional warp. Oh, sorry, directional blur rather first. Because I want to sort of start making this look more like a rock and less like bark. Now, the only difference between a directional blur and a regular blur is it's got this added feature here where you can actually set the direction of that blur, and I'm going to set it to a straight up 90 degrees, which is a quarter turn. It tells you, actually here it tells you in both. Okay, so now we've got these stripes going more or less in the direction we want. This is starting to look more like what I want it to look. What I'd like to see now is more contrast between my whites in my blacks. I want to see less gray. So in order to do that, I bring in a levels. And now we can adjust these levels, you know, sort of thinking about height and start creating a bit more black and white effect. So that's, yeah, so, you know, I want a rock that's got these deep, deep, deep crevices in it. So, you know, that looks pretty good. We can always come back to it and fix it later. And now I want to start working on the map that we're going to use for our directional warp. Well, you know, let's bring the directional warp out first. I don't think we've used this one before. It, as the name would imply, it will warp your map according to a specific direction. So just like a regular warp, which we'll be using later, and we might as well talk about now, it's like the difference between a blur and a directional blur. It'll have this added input where you can set the direction of your warp. So we've plugged in our map. Now notice it can take either a color or a gray for its main input, and both of these on the bottom are reserved for whatever map you're going to use, grayscale map, to warp that image in the top input. So here we have a warp angle, and it will allow us to set the degree of that warp. Now you will notice that absolutely nothing is happening right now, and that is because we don't have anything. It's got nothing to warp it against. So it's essentially warping it against black, which is meaningless. So now we have to create something that will warp this map for us. What I'm trying to achieve here is this sort of loop-de-loop effect that you have. It's not completely straight. It's got kind of a swirly thing going on. So that's what we're going to be doing with this directional warp. So we have to find a grayscale map that's going to kind of give us that effect. And what I found in the noise library was Crystal 2, which is, you know, starting to look like what I want it to look like. But again, I look at the size of these curves, and they're too big for what I know is my land mass within this frame. So again, we're going to go back to my favorites. We're going to get a noise upscale. And this time I'm only going to copy it and paste it the one time, because this size is kind of the size I want. You know, I just kind of tested it out because I don't want it too crazy with the loop-de-loops. And then the other thing that I did was kind of move these guys around, which you can do. The nice thing about these noise upscales is someone has kindly put in, trying to go more for an overall S-curve kind of thing here. Somebody has kindly put in these nice offsets, so you can kind of mess around with these noises that you're upscaling and, you know, just customize them a little bit, their interactions with each other. So, you know, I'm just doing some subtle, probably not necessary changes to get it kind of looking more like what I want it to look like. And now we can plug it into here and we will get our warp. So I'm starting to get these loop-de-loop things. Now I think this is a little too intense, so I'm gonna bring it down a little bit. And I can, because it's a directional warp, I can basically turn those loop-de-loops off when I have it. It stretches this to match the top one. So you're essentially cutting the warp out. You're kind of canceling the noise out. So anywhere between 0 and 90 degrees, and then we're going into, I don't know which one's negative, which one's positive, but then you're going in the opposite direction. So if we expose this, it gives us a full 180 degree of warping those straight lines according to, just creating the loop-de-loops that we want. So let's make an input parameter for that, and we'll call it Strata Warp. Actually, we're going to make a second one, so let's call it Strata Warp 1. So Warp 1, and we're going to call that group Strata. Now, we're going to keep this between, let's make the default 0.25, so it's completely straight, so that's at 90 degrees. And we'll make the maximum 0.5, which will correspond to 180 degrees. And this way, it'll sort of go negative and positive, and this way, that's about as much flexibility as you really need. Now, what we've done here is we've created sort of the basic looping system of the strata stones. And this again, I did this through experimentation. What we're going to add next is kind of a much larger curve, because after I had done the first one, they still kind of had this very straight up and down look. Now notice how sometimes they sort of change, the strata themselves begin to change directions in certain areas. And that's what this second warp that we're going to put in right now is going to do. So this is dealing with the stripes themselves, if you will. And then this warp is going to deal with the curvature of those stripes. So we're going to want a larger pattern than we have here. So again, the noise I picked for that was, I think, yeah, this one, creased. So this is a big curve, but again, it's not a big enough curve so that if I imagine that this square is the entirety of my image, it's not going to warp those strata enough for my taste. So again, I'm going to upscale it. Go to my favorites, noise upscale. That's more of the size I want. So I'm going to leave it at 512. Since we're going to keep this at, we could probably do the same with this one. I'm going to bump this down because again, I'm thinking, if I don't need a map at 512, I'm not going to have it at 512. It just adds processing time that is not going anywhere. Let's see what happens. I'm not sure what happens if we move this one down. Let's take a look as we do it. So let's find sort of mid. What happens if we, oh, I didn't want to do that. I just single click on it. Let's see what happens if we bring this down. There is no appreciable difference whatsoever. I'm going to bring this down now. Yeah, I don't think it's worth the extra. Yeah, we're going to keep that low. All right. So the problem I'm having with this guy right now is I want less black areas. I want it a bit more even. And I'd like it a bit more of an S curve. So I'm going to go back into my noise upscales. I'm going to offset these a little bit. So try to get, I don't know, just sort of more gentle somehow. Yeah, it's I think it's a little bit more S-curvy now. And then we're going to bring in a levels and sort of cut out some of this noise, because again, this is going to be a warp mask and this is a lot of information. So, I mean, let's take a look. It's like, woohoo, that's a little much. So even if we bring this intensity down, it's still, it's not really doing what we want. So what we're going to do, we're also going to put a blur in here. Let's do that now, because it's never going to look right unless we kind of blur it out. All right. I keep doing that. Single click. So let's kind of try to get rid of some of these mid values in here. Okay, and then let's really warp it out here. No, it's definitely not what I want. So I'm bringing that blur up to about, what, 2.4. Let's bring it up even higher. Yeah, okay. And then perhaps not go quite so crazy with those levels. Okay, that's better, I think. And then as we, so that 0.5 is going to be the high end of what we're going to do. We're not going to let it go beyond that. And then as we bring that down, it will straighten out. So I think that'll work for us. All right, so first of all, let's move this back. So now, before we go any further, we've exposed this. Oh, we haven't actually exposed it. We made the parameter for this one, I believe. We did, but we didn't expose it. While we're in the main graph, let's make another parameter for this guy. Because again, like with the other maps, what we're going to do, let's make it bigger, is we're going to, this is our deepest level. So we've got a nice black-white thing going on here. We're going to expose this mid-level. And this is going to determine the depth of those strata. So deepest, shallowest. So let's call this strata depth. Oh, we forgot to make the other strata warp too, so why? Okay. Depth. And we're going to make the maximum, I think we said 0.5. Oh, sorry, this is going to be 0.5. And let's take a look at what we have. It's kind of a nice mid thing here. So let's take a look. Let's go into our values. Take a look and see what that mid number is. It was 0.5 something. Let's see what it is again. Let's try that again. There we go. I'm double clicking on the main graph, and I'm going to set this number as my default. So once we go back here and we expose our value, it's going to stay the same. Okay. And then we have to create an input for this warp. So let's take a look at what we're doing here. Again, we are going to set the top at 0.5, and we'll have our default at something like 0.25. So I'm going to make another, I think I want that at 1. Yeah, I was thinking of the warp when I did that maximum. All right, so we're going to call this Strata Warp 2. And the group is Strata. We're going to have our default at 0.25 and our maximum at 0.5. That should do us. So let's expose this guy. Did I misspell that? I believe I did. Let's go back into our inputs. Strata, strata, strata. Well, we can move this guy so they're up next to each other. That's good enough for government work. Okay. So this is our basic look here. And we're going to add a couple more things that are going to, again, give us a little bit more flexibility when we're going to use this in whatever material we choose to use it in. All right, yeah, I just wanted to take a quick look at my notes. I think there's a node we can do without. We're going to drop one of the things off. So at this point, we're almost done. We're going to just add a blur in here. Again, to sort of soften it up a little bit. And again, it's going to be very low, but it's going to kind of take the edge off of the edges. Oops. Right. Now, what I had, the last thing we kind of want to put in here is a transform 2D. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to manipulate this image. I mean, you can use transform 2D for a whole bunch of different things, but what we're going to do in this particular case is we're going to, you can do it either through here by numbers, or you can just kind of just squeeze it in a little bit. I did it about half. It tightens them up. These in this image here, when you compare it to, again, you're looking at the overall size of our landmass. These are they're too spread apart. So what I'm doing with the transform 2D, as the name implies, you can transform these, essentially your a bitmap, into it'll tile it. So I just squeezed it in visually by half, or you can get more scientific with it here. You can offset things. There's a bunch of different things that you can do, and it just kind of manipulates this. It can do it with color too. It manipulates whatever bitmap you put in here. So it's a quick way of getting it kind of squeezed in. And then finally, we're going to create a pixel processor that's going to rotate, very simple rotation. So it'll give, again, it adds the flexibility of being able to rotate this map to have it fit into whatever you're making. So I'm going to set that as my output node. That's going to be my $sign position. Oh, what am I doing now? Oh, that's all I need is a, whoops, is a rotation. Yeah, we're going to keep this super simple. And I'm going to create now, oops, I'm going to create a variable in here, input parameter rather, in here for rotate strata. Like that. And this will allow us to, let's make sure we've got this. This is height, oh, let's switch these around. So this is our height map for strata, and this is going to be our strata height map. Right. Okay, so that's that. Okay, and now all we need to do is the grain map, which is super simple. I got dirt 1 here. There's space. There we go. Dirt 1. I scaled it up to the appropriate size by using a noise upscale. Copied it out twice. Daisy chained them all together. And job done. It just makes this nice sort of grainy map, and I'm going to use this for various colors, and we can use it for normals. And in fact, I was using it as a grain for some of the other stones, because once you're getting into sort of the normal and the color stuff, it's kind of nice to use something that's going to unify all of these various different things that we've made, because you don't want it to look like it's 3 different sections. You want to look, you want to have it look like they're all blending into each other, because it's, theoretically all kind of the same rock. And a nice easy way of doing this is with your color and with your normals, where you can start to repeat patterns, and it gives kind of a subtle overlay visually and aesthetically over what you're doing. So let's just close this out by saving it to our library. And we're going to call this Stratified Rock, Demos, Ground, Save. And we can publish it to the same spot. And that's that done. So with the next video, we are actually going to start building our final material. And one of the things that I decided as I was kind of looking over this stuff yesterday, that we're going to add, I'm not entirely happy with the color here. I'm happy with the textures. I'm happy with all this. I decided that I kind of wanted more bolder color slash roughness things going on. I think it's a little flat right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of do what I had in my notes, and then we're going to add some extra oomph as far as the color goes. So it'll be interesting and fun, and we'll see what happens.